This is a talk that I gave 5, 6 years ago now at a conference in Phoenix, Arizona called Pressnomics. And basically, my background, I've been involved in a number of different ventures over the course of my very winding career. This is kind of a single screen with all the logos. Everything above the line are the companies that I worked for. And then everything below the line are companies that I actually started or projects that I started. Um, and as Miguel said, that right now I'm, the entrepreneur in residence for Startup Lisboa. It's really just kind of a glorified mentorship title. And I think the goal today, what I wanted to do was share. I mean, we could talk all day about lessons from all these companies, but I picked just 4 of the ones that I've done, these 4. And I'm going to give you what I think was the key central lesson for each. And it's basically, if I could go back, the way that I frame this is, if I could go back in a time machine and give myself just 1 minute of advice prior to that venture, what would I tell myself, having been through it and learned the lesson on the end of it? What would have made our lives easier? And I think it's an interesting kind of thought experiment. I will say that I am not, I'll be the first person to say that, like, I've been okay. Jumpbox is the one that probably did the best. Most of my ventures have failed in one way or another. I did all right for Pagely in terms of growing their revenue, but my career is largely full of mistakes, failures, and I think that's a common thing amongst entrepreneurs. It's really like the name of the game is just get up one more time, then you get knocked down, and use everything you learned from the previous venture in your next one. And so hopefully over the course of this talk, you'll see some of that like creative learning and how lessons from one were then later applied in the other. Has anyone read this book? And I can't see your face, so I won't be able to see if you raise your hand, but this is a really good book. Highly recommend it if you need some inspiration. But it's kind of just it's a quick read, and it's a good book if you're a startup founder. I got to meet the author, Guy Kawasaki. If anyone knows him, he's a pretty prolific blogger. This was back in the day, an event in Palo Alto, and this phenomenon I think is common. What they call it, imposter syndrome, where even this guy, who is a very accomplished, just amazing person, he worked for Apple and he started his Garage Ventures. He's been a pretty successful venture capitalist, but he, by his own words, he says, I've never birthed a unicorn. I've never created Facebook or any of these other, like, I've never been in on the ground floor to one of these investments like bananas. So he doesn't feel like success, right? And it's like we're always our own worst critics. And I suffered from this pretty greatly until I heard someone say this. It says, you don't have to be an Olympic gold medalist to be a really good swim coach. And I admit that I'm not an Olympic gold medalist in terms of like having had a huge exit in a startup that was, wildly successful, but I have learned a ton along the, just along the journey with all these different ventures. And so I'm going to give you what I think are the 4 most important lessons today. And as you'll notice, some of these points, I do these little takeaway, Chinese takeaway boxes with something down there. These are like, when I do that, it's the lesson. It's, to me, it's something that you may want to, like, you don't need to take notes, but if you're going to remember things, these are concepts that I think are important. Reframing, like, you guys, the only way to fail is really to never start. And the fact that you're here means that you're already part of a startup. You're already in Startup Lisboa. So you've already, like, to whatever degree, you've succeeded in the sense that at least you took the chance. I can't tell you how many people I talked to when I was back in corporate world who would just talk about how they were going to make a company someday, but never did it. And it's the most, like, depressing thing to hear someone a year later still talking about the startup that they're going to do instead of just actually going and trying it. So kudos to you guys for actually being the ones to take the first step and already wherever you're at with your venture. I would encourage you to, like, just think about it as like you've already succeeded to some degree. Now it's a matter of, like, how successful is it going to be? Okay, so today I'm a music guy. I cast this in terms of, like, amplifiers. I want to give you basically 6 amplifiers, 4 of the main lessons, and then 2 little gems here that I'll just quickly give you. If you've not read the book Super Thinking, I highly recommend adding this to your reading list. This is one, like, you'll see me reference these mental models and things throughout the book, or throughout this talk. This thing is packed with them, and these mental models are basically like Lego blocks of thought. They're little design patterns of, the way things behave. And once you understand the concept, you kind of assemble these things and chain them together and use them to make sense of novel scenarios very quickly, and you can get your head around stuff a lot easier. So this is probably one of the best books I've read in the last couple of years, and I can't recommend it enough. For the folks that stay to the end of this presentation, I'm going to do something kind of special here. So I don't know if you've heard of the term spaced repetition. It's a kind of a fancy way of saying flashcards that are intelligent. This is a practice that I got into about 2 years ago. I've done it every morning since then, and it's another thing that I recommend. I basically took the mental models from super thinking, turned them into flashcards, and I've built on top of that. When I learn a concept and it's something new and I think it's important, I make it into a flashcard. And spaced repetition means that if I know it, it spaces it out. But if I don't know it well, it increases the frequency of it. So this app, Anki, I'm going to make it available for anyone who wants my deck of these 200 mental models, much of which are from super thinking, but a lot that I've added to since then. It's super useful. If you stick around to the end, I'll make that available to you, and that'll be kind of a bonus for staying. So, all right, with that, let's dig in here to the first lesson, customer development. This is Jumpbox. So Jumpbox, and then again, I'm going to frame this all, like I said, as like a time machine experiment. This is the DeLorean from Back to the Future, the flux capacitor, if anyone's watched the movie. And so basically, I'm going to give the context of what happened, and then I'm going to basically do like the context of the problem, and then the 1 minute that I would spend with myself, giving myself that advice from the time machine. Okay, so that's set up here. So Jumpbox, what was it, real quick? This is a company I started in 2006, July, with a co-founder. And very quick, what it was, we came up with a whole new way of distributing software. We basically figured out a way, instead of shipping an installer for an application, this was the point at which virtual machines were becoming available. And so we realized that we could actually just make an entire computer in software and then ship that, and it would be a radically new way to deliver software and keep it updated and backed up, and basically democratize a whole class of software called open source. We were uniquely positioned to be able to make this hard software easier to use, because to the end user at that point, everything's a virtual machine. They just turn it on and it works. The way we came up with this, though, is very interesting. Like that wasn't the original vision. The original vision was two developers who found a bunch of useful open source development focused software. And we thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to put this stuff on a Mac Mini and send this to people? And we just pre-configure it, do all the hard work. It's like days of setup to get Trac and Subversion and all these tools talking to one another, bug wikis, bug tracking software, wiki messaging systems, all this stuff. We cobble it together, integrate it, and then put it on a Mac Mini. And our thought was, we can just ship this to people, and then folks will buy this for us for their project. What we quickly found out was that it's just preclusive. Like, we didn't have a lot of capital at the time. No one would talk to us. Like the smallest deal they would do was like 10,000 units wholesale, and it's just like, so we kind of we started this company with this vision of executing a certain thing, and then immediately into it realized that we couldn't do it. And so this concept of constraints breed creativity, where we arrived, interestingly enough, my co-founder, the technical person, was already looking at using virtualization within the Mac Mini to deliver this software. And he basically realized we don't need the hardware at all. We can actually just ship the virtual machines themselves. And so this became the genesis for this company. We ended up having customers in over 40 countries. We made multiple $1 million in revenue. And it became a whole thing. We actually created a space that's now known as virtual appliances. And so people use these virtual appliances, was like a very specific type of virtual machine that knew how to update itself, and you couldn't break a lot of stuff with it. It had kind of like a management layer wrapped around it. So this was one of the conferences we went to. But anyways, so the gist here, though, with this, like the lesson to be learned from having done this, and this company ran for almost 10 years before we eventually had to shut it down. And I won't cover the entire history of the company, but this is what I think is important. So it took us a year to build this product. We started it in July 2006, and you can see it was September 2007 was our first revenue, and we were selling individual virtual machines to start out for $20 each. And I don't have the scale here, but I want to say it was like maybe $1,000 or something, like those lines that are hovering around, you know, nothing. I think we were making somewhere on the order of like $1,000 a month or something, selling $20 virtual machines. And we realized 6 months into it, we've got to do something different. Like, this isn't ever going to be big enough. We can't sell enough of these things. We can't grow the market fast enough. How do we turn this into something, you know, that's going to be big enough? And that's where, on a plane flight to go pitch a VC firm in Boulder, Colorado, I actually had the idea. I said, well, in the same way that, like, you know, Blockbuster or Netflix doesn't sell individual movies, they sell a subscription access to this library, and you can use as many as you want. What if, instead of selling these one-off virtual machines, what if we create like a library and sell subscription access to the library? So we got back, my co-founder and I came back and we implemented that idea, and you can see just the uptick there. That was when we were off to the races. Our revenue started increasing. Fast forward, I went in, what was it? August is when I started doing the roadshow, drove out to San Francisco. You know, we had some employees at this time, but I packed my car, drove all the way out to San Francisco, and started meeting with people, just networking, trying to meet anyone I could. I ultimately ended up meeting some of the right people, and I had conversations with 14 venture capitalists, which is like pretty cool, from going, you know, go somewhere not knowing anyone, and then 30 days later you're in the offices with 14 different VCs. Racked up a ton of parking tickets, as you can see, because I didn't know what I was doing in San Francisco there. Yeah, we pitched a thing called Under the Radar. Ended up having a really positive conversation. This is Mayfield, one of the huge VCs there. We got a verbal go-ahead from Sequoia, but then September 2008 happened, and long story short, funding window closed, yada, yada, yada. What I'm getting at with this story, though, is we built the technology. Like, what we did, we executed the classic, what I call field of dreams fallacy. If you've seen that movie, he has this thing where if you build it, they will come. Well, that mantra is not true in software. Like, if you build something, people aren't going to flock to it like you think they are. You may be in love with your idea, but like, not everyone else is. And so with this company, what I wish we would have done is eliminate this field of dreams fallacy early on. We started with the technology. We built it because we knew it was important, but we got a year into it before we ever even tried to figure out the sales and marketing of this thing. And so if I had it to go over again, here's me going back in time, setting DeLorean to July 26, 2006, which is the day we started the company. I would go back and tell myself this: look, don't build out the tech first. We need to do customer development. Customer development is this guy, Steve Blank. If anyone knows him, he's basically the godfather of this whole movement. Highly recommend. He has a free course on Udacity. If you Google his name, Udacity, you'll find it. It's an excellent course that I recommend every entrepreneur go through. But he was the author of the 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And this became, even though it was like a lot of typos, this book was just revolutionary. It came up with this idea of customer discovery, customer validation, like breaking it into 4 steps, using the business model canvas to track, you know, where your uncertainty was and what your knowns and unknowns, and then basically building out these 9 quadrants of the model. And I think you guys, I'm pretty sure that you use that today at Startup Lisboa. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would tell myself, look, instead of like spending a year in a cave developing Jumpbox, the technology, and then starting the clock a year later to go then figure out all the sales and marketing, we should parallelize that at the very least. If not, flip it. You know, do the sales and marketing first, sell something you don't have, meet with a lot of people, build the landing pages, you know, check the interest in it, figure out and then refine the messaging, refine what the value prop actually is, and do all that first, or at the very least in parallel to building the technology. You know, point number 1. Point number 2, if anyone knows Chris Dixon, he's another VC, pretty famous, but he has something called the bowling pin strategy. And probably the best example of the bowling pin strategy was Facebook. The way that they began, they didn't try to boil the ocean and be like the social network for everyone. They started first off at Harvard as the, you know, Harvard only students. And then they expanded into Ivy League schools, and then they expanded to all schools, and then made it available to the general public. And it's this idea that bowling pin strategy is you want to knock down one pin. You don't want to focus on knocking down the whole set. You pick one pin and knock that down, and then move from there laterally. And it's like boil the ocean is sometimes what they say. Don't try to boil the ocean. Like, pick your segment and really zero in on that. What, like, we by having a general purpose tech, the world was our customer. We said like literally anyone can use this to make open source easier. And while attractive to geeks, like we got very starry-eyed with like, yeah, anyone can be our customer. It also made the marketing challenge of this like extremely complicated, like really hard when everyone is your potential customer. Like we would have been way better off had we just said, look, schools are our customers and we're going to target school IT admin, and we're going to cobble together technologies that help them, but we're going to understand their problems first. And like, what else do they face? What are the integration issues and the security issues and the things that are unique to schools? And let's start there and make that our customer instead of what we did, make a general purpose tech. So anyways, that would be the advice that I'd give myself. And by the way, guys, and this is me coming back to the present time. If there's questions, if you want to interrupt, I want to make this interactive. You can feel free to interrupt and like ask anything you like these breaks, or if you want to hold it to the end, hope there'll be some time at the end for the questions. So there's no questions right now. I'll dive into the next one. But if you have questions,
I think the best way would be people just write their questions on the chat, and then by the end we'll run through all of them, because maybe something people ask now you'll be answering later on. So it just gives like a better flow.
Okay, cool. That's a good idea. All right, so let's dig into number 2 here. Shortsailpedia is, this was a company basically that while I was doing Jumpbox, had taken out a home equity line of credit, $140,000 line of credit on a house that I owned to start that company. And so we were in the hole basically. And then the market, I don't know if it happened here in Portugal, but in the US, 2008, we had a real housing crisis where the markets all collapsed basically. And so this house was extremely underwater, and it basically came to the point where I owed more than the house was worth. And it doesn't make sense at that point to continue paying when you owe more than the value of something. So I was looking at my options. It was a really tough time. We were still struggling with Jumpbox, and then this happened. And so I was basically considering just walking away and leaving the keys to the house there. And because I'm not going to have a debt on something that's not even worth what I'm paying to hold it. So I was facing foreclosure, and but instead of foreclosing, what I learned about was this concept of a short sale through a friend of a friend. Long story short, this guy Seth was a genius realtor. He navigated it. He was able to accomplish the short sale for me, got the debt forgiven. It helped me go on with my life. My credit score wasn't completely ruined by 300 points. So it was a really nice outcome for an otherwise terrible situation. And what I realized was, I said, Seth, with your knowledge of this space and how to do what you just did, and all these people that are now facing the same situation, and my knowledge of the tech, we should create a system that enables people, we should apply your expertise and make it possible for you to help all these other people get short sales. So we built a question and answer system. We did just that. We established a network of about 150 realtors around the US. And we began basically doing lead gen and funneling deals to these realtors. We would vet the realtors, vet the clients, and then make the connection. And we basically take a referral commission on any of the deals that they closed. And so that worked really well. It turned out to be a really interesting model. The problem with this one was we were just complete system sprawl. We were using all these different tools to do it. We literally had some stuff on a yellow pad. We had High-Rise CRM that we tried for a while, Zoho CRM. We thought we could customize that. We had some stuff in Things app, WordPress, Google Docs, like all these things you see here were just different pieces. And it was incredibly, it was small. It data in way too many places, and it wasn't talking to each other. And it was just a nightmare. And the goal was like, how are we going to manage all these deals we're giving to all these realtors, and contact with the homeowners, making sure that they have a good experience all the way through. And so I was trying to get my head around like how we do this. And about that time, I learned about this piece of software called Infusionsoft, which basically allowed me to do just that. It allowed me to perform automation. And basically, so every time one of these deals, we handed them off, it would send a note to the homeowner, connect them to the realtor, and then it would babysit the deal through completion. So it'd say, do we have an inspection? Do we have escrow? Do we have title? Da, 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 da. And it would check with both people and make sure that basically nothing fell through the cracks. And so automation, while now it's pretty commonplace, a lot of people use marketing automation and whatnot. Back then, this was kind of a novel use of that technology, and it allowed us to build that business because it just wouldn't have worked otherwise, given how complex and how many moving parts and 150 realtors. You can imagine all the deals going to all those different people. It was just a nightmare to try and track and stay on top of everything. So with this one, the advice, if I could go back and give myself any bit of advice, it was a long time coming to get to the point where we used automation. So I would tell myself earlier on that process automation is truly key. And while it was useful for the management of those deals, I think of that as almost like a babysitting function. It can also be used very effectively for lead generation. Like, so once you understand that automation is really just like the automating things, but lifecycle marketing is the art of how you want to take someone through the continuum of how they engage with you, from not knowing about you to then being a lead, to then being a prospect, to being a happy customer and now buying anything you have and telling their friends. Like, as you move down that continuum, automation can help you do that at scale. And this guy, he still has his course out there. I can't recommend it enough, but Jermaine Griggs, like this beacon of someone who got it early on and who really figured out how to do this stuff. And he has something called scaling personal attention. And so I would, if I could go back and tell myself anything, I would just say, go take that guy's course and use scaling personal attention. Just implement that concept for your startup. Okay. And by the way, the tool that I no longer use Infusionsoft. I'm a huge fan of something called ActiveCampaign. If you're interested in it, talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to show it to you. But it's the best thing that I've found in terms of automating stuff. Okay, so back to the future. Let's talk about lean. Okay, so Scratch Audio. The story on this one, let me just check how we're doing on time. Yeah, cool. Scratch Audio. So this was another situation. You would have thought I learned my lesson with Jumpbox. I didn't. This was a situation where I found a young guy who had developed a technology that was essentially like Google Docs for audio. In the browser, he figured out a way. I'm a musician. I don't know if you can see the guitar in the background, but he had figured out a way to take what they call DAW, the digital audio workstation, and actually port it to Silverlight and run it in the browser, so that if Miguel, if you played the drums and then maybe Nuno played the bass and I'm going to put down some vocals, we could all just use our web browser and record this song remotely, and it would literally like Google Docs working on a project, all via our web browsers. It was really like no one was doing anything like that at the time. It was really groundbreaking. And being a geek, I fell in love with the technology, and I said, this is amazing. Let's partner up and let's figure out how to make this into a company. Again, fallacy though, right? Like, don't start with the tech, start with the customers. Our thought at the time was like, oh, this is one of those things where like it's like Google Docs. Everyone's going to want to use it. Like, and if we get 1% of the market and they pay us $5, yada yada yada. Well, no, like you have to start with the customer, right? So this is a quick one, but I'll go back in time and I'll tell myself this: look, there's going to be a fork in the road where you guys have to choose. We did eventually monetize that, and I can tell you what we did, but you need to either pick B2B or B2C. We started out trying to do B2C and sell to end users like musicians. And if you know any musicians, typically they don't have a huge budget. They're any budget they do, they're saving up for their next piece of equipment. They don't want to pay for software. So it took us far too long to realize that our customer wasn't the musicians. Our customer was the people who wanted to aggregate musicians. And we eventually did a deal and found a way to monetize it. But like, I would say this: maybe there's a way to make B2C work. Maybe there's a way to make B2B work. But the way to get stuck in the middle, like, I don't know if you guys have heard this parable of like the donkey that sees a food source and starts walking towards the food source, but then looks back over their shoulder and says, oh, I'm getting further away from that one. So turns around and goes back towards that one. And now you can see where that ends up, right? Donkey ends up keeling over directly in between these two food sources because it just gets further from one. So it turns around and like, just commit, pick one and go. Like, had we just gone all in on one of them, it probably would have been fine. But yeah, B2B is sales driven, B2C is marketing driven. The Lean Startup book on this, highly recommend. So anyways, the way you use Lean, I wish I had the screenshot to show you of what we ended up doing here. And I wish we had done it earlier. The idea of lean is like basically you want to reduce risk, uncertainty, and waste. You want to short circuit painful trial and error learning and front load all that risk and get it out of the way as early as possible. And the way you go about doing that is you say, what do I need to learn next? What is the thing that we are trying to learn next in our startup? You prioritize that, and then you say, what data will yield the answer to that question? What experiment can I conduct to get that data? And then go run that experiment. And then this is just a big loop. And you use the business model canvas with this loop to gradually turn those red squares into green squares and flesh out and make things more certain. What we did, I wish I had the screenshot. We ended up figuring out like we didn't know how to charge for this stuff, and so we made it free. We made everyone could, you didn't even have to give us an email. You could go in and like start recording a song and get it all like sequenced up and have your friends collaborate on it. But if you wanted to save it, you then had to create an account. So what we did was after the account creation screen, we made another screen that said choose your plan. And these plans, there's like a, copper, silver, gold, or whatever, 3 levels, and then different features, whatnot. And we let people pick which plan they wanted or the free plan. And then on that next screen, we just said, hey, guess what? It's actually, we're giving it away free right now, but thanks for your input because we're just trying to figure out what people want. And had we asked a survey response to that, people will tell you, oh, I want this, I want that. And yeah, sure, I'd pay for it. What we were gathering by doing it that way is explicitly like treating it as an actual pricing sign up page. We got the clicks that were the indicator of truth. Like they thought they were signing up for a plan at that point and they got a windfall. They got a free plan when they thought they would be paying for something. But it was invaluable to figure out what people truly wanted. And there's tools that can show you. Optimizely is what we use to covariate, do multivariate analysis of the features and the pricing of each and to figure out what was getting the most clicks. And that helped us figure out what was the way to charge for this stuff. But again, we just thought about it like, what do we need to learn next? We need to learn what people are willing to pay for and how to present it and what features they need, all that stuff. So anyways, but this loop, really invaluable way to think about things. What do I need to learn? What data will yield that answer? What experiment will yield that data? And now let's just go run that experiment. This is like the key to, I would say this is like the key to startups. Okay, back to the future. And we're on to the last one here. And this one I call the inversion of control pattern. If you look that up, you're not going to find this. You're going to find something called the Spring Framework in Java. I'll explain what this is. We've actually already seen, we've actually talked about an instance of this with where I pushed the control, like pushing the control to the real estate agents, then update and give us that information back instead of us hounding and needing to be like the single like blocker source of truth and all that. Like we pushed that to the edges and we let them handle it. Let me give you another example with this company. Automation Gurus. Basically, this was when I was a consultant doing Infusionsoft consulting, but I realized I needed all these other pieces. And I had smart friends who were very good designers, developers, copywriters, conversion rate optimization, SEO experts, videographers, like all these pieces. I constantly had to farm out. So I'd be consulting for a client and they'd need a logo and they'd also need some copy for a landing page and they needed a video and they needed this and that. And so projects sprawled. It took too long. It was a lot of communications. It was a lot of back and forth. And then, you've got relaying information, so you have lower fidelity. It was kind of a nightmarish way to get things done. And projects took on the order of like 2 to 3 months, right? So I had this idea. I said, well, what if we could get all those people in a room? And instead of doing this over the course of 2 or 3 months, what if we can do it in a weekend and get all the right people in the room and do this? And I said, okay, that's a great idea. But then when it came time to do it, I realized, holy crap, like I'm talking about like accelerating 3 months of work that I do for these different clients. And I'm going to do 3 of them at a time in a room with everyone depending on me. That's not going to scale. So what I realized though is the inversion of control pattern. This is what it is. We used poker chips. I don't know if you guys blow it up. You can see we had actual poker chips. I created a mini economy in the room and I made project managers. So I invited all those roles that I just told you about, but then I had 3 project managers, one for each team. and they were in charge of getting the outcome for that client. And then they got a stack of poker chips that was basically the money that they could spend to pay other people that they needed that weekend to get anything done. And so what this did is it took all the management off me. I could then focus on supporting the team leaders, and the team leaders, it was in their interest to use those chips wisely and get the people they needed. And at the end of the day, the client just paid me. I carved up that money, turned it in, took some for myself, then turned the rest in those poker chips. And it was a very efficient free market that we created in that room that got everything done that it needed to do. And you can Google some of the testimonials and stuff. Like, this was an incredibly revolutionary way of working, and people loved it because we could get 3 months of work done in a weekend. And I know that sounds insane. Like, there is a little bit of prep leading up to it, and there's a little bit of like down ramp after it. But that model is also then what inspired that plus Startup Weekend. It inspired what I do now with Charity Makeover. So basically, what the lesson though, I learned it pretty quickly. But if I was going to go back and tell myself anything, I would have myself read this book. This is another book I would write down. This was mandatory reading at Pagely, a company that I worked for. Turn the ship around. The idea here is basically what we did. It's this idea, dependency injection, if you're a technologist, but it's pushing decision making to the edges. It's this notion of like creating an efficient market where there's interested, like self-interest will drive the different pieces and it'll figure itself out. And then this last one, which is kind of a separate lesson, basically the play with that company that I realized after the fact was that, similar to an architect that does the blueprints to a building, they own those blueprints. They license it to the building owner to use the building, but they retain the ownership of those blueprints. Like, all this stuff that we ended up creating for these clients, the real economic win was in that we were creating all this original IP of which we retain the blueprint and we licensed it to the clients. And so I'm basically using an army of all these different people to create a mountain of useful IP, which can then be resold elsewhere, templatized and resold. So that was the lesson there. Okay, guys, so that's all for lessons. I figured I'd just spend one brief slide telling you what I'm working on now, since I kind of mentioned it in the last one. So Charity Makeover is kind of, if you know what Startup Weekend is, it's very similar to that. It's a project. I've been 9 Startup Weekends. I've hosted 3 of them. They're amazing events, but I kind of realized in going to them that people love the experience. They love meeting people and building something, accelerating it, doing it in a weekend, and just everything that comes with that. But Startup Weekends were very wasteful, and at the end of them, like, the project that people created oftentimes just got orphaned and thrown away, and it was kind of just like a loss. It was a waste of value. And so I thought, hey, could we do this as the exact same experience, but only instead of trying to create a new like commercial project that's going to just become vaporware, what if instead we just like rallied around local charities and we actually help them like build stuff that will help them, digital assets that will help their cause, so that when we leave, that lives on and it continues working. We've done a number of events. We obviously COVID kind of changed the game. We tried doing it virtually, but we had to shut it down. I am in the process of working on the next iteration of this. It's called Problematic, but I have a way of scaling it. And I think virtual events, everyone's tired. Like, I'm really surprised, like Zoom calls. I'm thankful you guys all took the time to be on Zoom calls. I know that they're exhausting. But to me, I don't want to create like more obligations and more Zoom calls for people. So I have a different model. I'm working on that. So this consumes part of my time right now. I'm also putting together something called Lisbon Retreat and Startup Hostel. So this one is still in the very early stages, but I have a vision to bring startup founders together, and basically startup founders, and then the Lisbon Retreat would be more like nomads, but bring these folks together and to be able to just like go somewhere in nature and work on the startup. I think that you can get inspired, and it's changing the scene, the set and setting, and like being in a new inspiring environment. I think has a just incredible effect on your psyche. And so that's the vision there, is to basically go to a sustainable retreat on an ecosystem, like eco farm, and basically work on startups together. And then the last thing I'm working on is I'm actually writing an ebook in public right now, non-reliant. So anyways, that's the talk. You guys said if you stick around to the end that I'd give away some stuff. So this is what I'm going to do. If you put your email in chat, I will send you a copy of that ebook that I'm working on. I will send you the Anki deck if you want it with these 200 mental models, and then I'll give you the slide deck for these slides. So with that, I'll leave it up to you guys. What questions do you have?
So first of all, Sean, thank you so much for the presentation. These 45 minutes just totally flew. I think one of the main takeaways is that throughout the time, you became faster with getting your lessons, like the time scope of each project and the way that you iterate until you find like the magic piece of it really shortened through time. Is that also like a skill that you develop? Is it age and experience? How do you explain that?
Are you saying that in terms of like the presentation it was like too short in terms of the
no
are you saying
in terms of your life, it seems like each lesson took less time than the previous one.
Yeah, no, I think that's why I think these mental models are so valuable, is that once you start internalizing them and they become Lego blocks and you can recognize a pattern and be like, okay, that's something automation could solve. That's something where I can use the inversion of control pattern. You know, this is this cognitive bias, this, you know, you start to see things in terms of box, like recognizable patterns that can be stacked. And I just think like the most advantageous thing you could do as an entrepreneur, like take the Steve Blank Udacity course, learn mental models, like just try to drill them. It takes 5 minutes every day to run through a deck of like 10 of these things. And, you know, just over time, you start to acquire and internalize these things, and you'll begin to see them everywhere. You'll see just like, you'll be able to pick out instances and say, oh, that's the Chatelier effect. That's the Hawthorne effect, you know, and like just knowing those mental models though, just like makes you able to piece things together quickly. So I think if that answers your question, like once it does, it stacks. Like as you get a better tool set, I think you compress the time that it requires to get your head around things.
Thank you very much. So questions, people. If nobody comes forward, I'll start questioning people directly. Luis, please.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question. Is always the same question that I debate when thinking about first talk to clients, then build stuff. When you are building stuff for enterprise or for companies, and that they are already expecting seeing something. Yeah. So sometimes it's very difficult to do clients, but sometimes you need to do tech, and we need to make something that they can see, and they can see that working. That is for me, it's the most difficult part, being doing what you say in some kind of software. I don't know if I can in enterprise, for example.
It's really interesting timing that you bring this up. Let me I'm actually just gonna link here real quick, put this in chat, and then I'm gonna show you how I deal with this. So that link, before you look at it, let me just take you over here. Hopefully I don't lose the connection, but this is the whiteboard. Like, so this is an app this is the problematic app that I'm working on right now. And basically I went through and stubbed out, you know, each one of these is basically a screen in the mobile app. And then now if you look at that link, that tool, it's a free tool that allows you to take a picture of each one of those and treat it as the screen, and then hot link the buttons. And so that's how you can rapidly iterate a mobile interface and pull together a concept you can put in people's hands. And it's literally takes, you know, whatever, an hour that it took to draw that on the whiteboard, and then 15 minutes to sync it all in that app. Like that's my answer, is like, what is the least amount of work you can do to begin having those conversations and to give, you know, to put an app in someone's hands where they can at least, like, it's cheesy, right? Because it's all hand drawn and whatnot, but at least you can have the conversation, and that's what's important. And I would say there's even an advantage of staying lo-fi early on by making it hand drawn. It kind of leaves room for, or it leaves permission to be like, I don't think it should work that way, or like, what if it did this? And it as soon as you have things where there's like actual buttons and it's a clickable prototype now, it's just like, it's too rigid. People think like, oh, that's the way it is. But when it's drawn, it's a more loose, like, permission to change it type of thing. But that's my answer. Like in the enterprise, like, I know it's a little more stodgy, and there's more like, you're gonna meet with maybe some more resistance. But at the end of the day, an enterprise is just a bunch of people that are trying to get their jobs done. And so you need to find out, like, navigate the org chart, figure out in whose interest is it, you know, to make this like better or faster or cheaper, whatever it is. And then they will, if once you, like, you need to find that economic buyer and the user, and then figure out who's who, and then go to the, you know, like, navigate that, and then get the prototype in their hands as early as possible before you start building stuff. Does that kind of answer your question, or any other?
Yeah, it's very easy to say. Sometimes it's very hard to do, because our companies expect, when we are doing presentations, and we are in the 6 months prior to this, we were not having we are doing the software, but not making the clients use it. And when people saw people enterprise software or companies with most 100 employees, they expect a different kind of software, and sometimes the conversation dies because of that. But I understand. I totally agree with you. Sometimes it's very difficult to execute like that. But thank you a lot.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not trying to trivialize. I know, like, I've done enterprise sales, and I know, like, the cycles and just the bureaucracy involved there. So I sympathize with you, and I don't envy that job. Like, there's a reason that I'm no longer in enterprise sales.
Thank you, Sean, for another great answer. So who's coming forward for another question? Otherwise, I already have another victim in ONI. So no? Okay. Sivo, I know you're there. Please show your face, because first of all, I would like to give a little bit props to Sivo. Basically, just won a big contest by the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Everybody knows about Define Crowd. Now everybody's going to know about Silicon Valley as well. So Sivo, you had to pivot. Probably you identify a lot with this process. Do you have any question for Sean?
Hi, Sean. How's it going? First of all, yeah, thanks, Uno, for the intro, and thanks, Sean, for the presentation. You know, it's like, this is probably my first Zoom call in like the last 1 week. I've been trying to like delay a lot of my calls, and then just trying to kind of turn off for a while. So this is good to be back. So I kind of want to go back to that first point that I landed when I arrived in this call, which is that point when you brought up what was that term again, when you were kind of doubting yourself, like even after you've achieved a certain thing, you know, like, what was that term? I forgot.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, like that syndrome. And how do you exactly overcome that?
I'm sorry, you kind of cut out. Or I lost your audio. It might be on my end. Can you say that again? How do you deal with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so like I said, that quote that on like the thing that really unlocked it for me, like, first of all, I'm not afraid of looking stupid, I guess. Like, that's the like, I just don't care if people think I'm an idiot. Like, there's I've got up on stage and probably said things, and like, people like roll their eyes or scratch their head. It's like, ultimately, I don't care. Like, I know there's value in these things, and like, if my anxiety or fear about that is then going to prevent me from giving valuable gifts to those people, then I need to figure out how to get over that. Like, that's how I get over it. But yeah, I think realize that people like Guy Kawasaki have imposter syndrome, like people who are wildly successful. I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg, like pick the Steve Jobs and the luminaries who have done these massive companies, they still probably hold themselves to a higher standard. They're probably looking at Elon Musk with jealousy, being like, that guy's going to Mars. Like, I'm not that cool, So there's always someone ahead of you. And I think it's just a matter of coming to peace with that and being like, you know what, there's people behind me that I can help. And those are the ones, like, if I can just package this and take what took me so long to figure out, if I can then package that up and give that learning so it takes someone else less time to figure it out, then that's a win. That's a huge win.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, man.
I think we have 2 minutes. So it's like in the weddings, speak now or hold it forever. So take this opportunity. It's 20 years of experience in front of you. So there are no such thing as dumb questions. Like Sean said, you shouldn't be afraid of looking a fool. And I'm sure all of you have interesting questions as well. So I don't know. Marta, you're showing your face. It was by accident. Anyone?
I have a curiosity.
Sure.
Sean, until now I saw that you created about 11 projects. Did you create it all by yourself or you had co-partners?
I had co-founders on most of them. I won't go back to that slide. Like, Lights Out Production was a solo consultancy, so that was just me. The Bandwagon was with my brother. Artilage, I had a partner in Laguna. Jumpbox had a partner. Short Sale PD had a partner. Scratch Audio was with a partner. So like most of these was me pairing up with someone. I'm semi-technical. I used to be a computer programmer, but like I'm just like awful today. You wouldn't want me programming anything today.
And
sorry, Sean, I'm just gonna.
Sorry.
No.
Most of them are still functioning, or somehow have you closed companies? What happened to most of them?
In terms of where those companies stand, most of them are largely shut down at this point. Jumpbox was the longest running, and we eventually shuttered it. We had investors. We did a convertible debt financing for investors that was contingent upon closing institutional money to trigger the conversion. And that never happened. So we ended up with like massive interest and convertible notes. And it basically like so much code debt and so much just like mental anguish. Like it was an exhausting 10 years of trying to build something. With the challenge with that one, we had chosen a really ambitious thing to like package any application, any database, any programming language, any library dependency, make it run on any computing environment. It was just like an exhausting, and then keep it updated. We eventually just shuttered that one. But like same thing with most of those. Scratch Audio is not there. Grid 7 is just like my consulting brand now. But yeah, most of these things, fortunately, shuttered. Short sales ran their course. They're no longer an issue. So that one, although they might become an issue soon. But does that answer your question? I know this is what I'm saying. Like in a lot of ways, you can say like I have had a string of lukewarm wins, and some of them which like did okay for a while, but nothing was like the home run.
Awesome, Sean. Yeah, I was just gonna add up to like what her point. I don't know if you got to hear that, but I mean, if we do the math, you said you did about 11 or more projects, and all of them you were doing it with co-founders and partners, right? So that would be like 20, 30 people that you just decided, let's spend the next months or years doing something with these guys, right? Like, were you purposely looking, for co-founders for each of these projects, or it's always like more spontaneous? Like, how did these co-founders mechanism working out for you?
Yeah, all of them were people that I met in person, and then we had a commonality. Like the Jumpbox one, which ran the longest, we were sharing office space. I had thrown a note out to classified ads and just wanted to get an office. I was like just going stir crazy in my house, and so this guy was the only one who responded. We ended up sharing office space, and then just over the course of many lunches and talking, he was very technical, and we had this idea. We tried to do it in like a more loose format, and I had some money that became available, And so I said, screw it. Like, why don't we just turn this into an actual company and approach it like a real project instead of this like weekend endeavor kind of sweat thing. But the other ones, like the Scratch Audio guy, I met at a meetup. The short sale guy, obviously, was my realtor through my own short sale. So it's really just people that I ran into in the course of some normal dealing, and then ended up hitting it off and deciding like, let's just try this.
Okay.
If you're looking, are you asking because you yourself are looking for a co-founder, or what's the context of your
No, I'm just trying to like wonder, like, because I've been through like multiple process of doing that, you know. Some of them have turned out to be great and some were not, you know. So that's why I wanted to see like, how did you actually handle that, you know, like, and in most of these projects, were there in the majority of them, was it mostly your idea and then people coming to you, or most of it was just more like, let's just gather with a group of people and figure something out and just co-create something, you know, or the idea is on the table already, you know? Like,
I don't know, like the idea, Box was not my idea, that was Kimbro. Scratch Audio was Eric's idea. Short Salepedia was my idea, just because I knew, like, I saw that we had an edge. I saw that he had an incredible skill navigating something that I didn't even know about, and that most of the world was facing at that point, and that a lot of people didn't even realize that short sale was an option. And so I just said, like, God, there's got to be some way that I can use my lead gen knowledge at this point to like get the awareness out to that group of people. So I don't know, it's really like seeing an opportunity and just seeing a fit where you think, okay, let's, like, there could be something here. Let's talk more. At some point, you got to just try it, though. That's why I was saying at the beginning, like, you can talk all day about what if, but like, what's that quickest experiment that you can run to validate, is there truly something here?
perfect.
Co-founder wise, I think the best outcomes with co-founders have come from the people that I know the best. And like I definitely don't advise trying to like meet someone over like a coffee and then decide you're gonna be their co-founder. Like, you gotta date them for a while, so to speak.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Sean.
I guess that's your advice. So to the equivalent of not getting married in Vegas or something like that.
Correct.
So if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I would like to thank you, Sean, for this amazing presentation. It's like, you know, those stupid truths, you know, they are so simple, but it takes a lot of blood and time for you to figure it out. So I hope all of our entrepreneurs that had the opportunity to be here can cut short on all that time and take advantage of this. I would like to thank everybody that attended this presentation. Sean, you're recording it. Are you going to share it?
Yeah. I'll cut out the parts. Like, I'll try to like trim it up and make it more presentable. And yeah, I'll make it. I'll put it on my blog on Grid 7.
Great. So then you'll be able to share it with your friends and colleagues. So I think that's all, Sean. You can close it. This was yours.
Yep. All right, guys. We'll see you. Nice meeting y'all.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sean. Thank you.